spent a lot of time talking about collaboration, the concept of deep collaboration, and how people can more effectively work together for. And David kind of uses this term a lot, high value outcomes, because really that's at the core of what deep collaboration is. We're going to go ahead and jump in, and I think probably what we want to do is kind of define deep collaboration. It's a concept that's been around for a while, but it's starting to gain more traction now, especially with COVID and everything that's happened in the hybrid workplace. But as you can see here, a general definition of it is it's creating this single destination for people to build and collaborate around a specific job to be done. And really, it's this idea of being able, what I view it as, and I'd love to hear from you, David, is having this single place that not only are you collaborating, but you're creating, you're working. Everything is happening in this single space, so you don't have to do something here and then move somewhere else and keep moving around. So, and when people talk about, I believe, innovation, that's moving faster, more frictionless, and that's where deep collaboration comes in. But what are your thoughts on it, David?
Yeah, it's a lot of that. One of the things that we see, so digital experiences in our world require a lot of teams to come together, right? So some people thought, oh, it's just a marketing job, and what the reality is, it's marketing coming together with your customer success or customer experience organization coming together with your sales organization. Usually, there's a tremendous amount of IT support for there. So just in that sentence, I've reeled off 4 different functions that have to come together, and I love the concept of job to be done to move the company forward. And so when I think of deep collaboration, I'm also thinking about how do different functions come together that wouldn't otherwise work together. Okay, so for example, we're a Microsoft Teams shop. We use Teams for instant messaging, but it's not a place to bring people together. You can share documents, but you can't really work there, right? You can't effectively bring all the different pieces of ideas together. You can't put an execution plan together because the way that it's designed, it's just not aligned to the way people work. And so I think, a key concept here is you have to understand how people want to work together, how those functions come together as well. So that's why I think there's a separate category called deep collaboration, because it does really focus on this is how human beings choose to work together.
Yeah, I love it. So what I'm doing now is kind of whiteboarding a concept that you and I have talked about, and kind of aligned with what you're saying. It's this idea of the typical way right now of doing stuff is we're going to meet, and we're going to talk about the job to be done, the problem to be solved, whatever it is. And we're going to break off and start to do work mutually exclusive of one another. And maybe we're in smaller groups and in different tool sets. And then we're going to review. And that review typically is going to consist of emailing, hey, I put together this deck, David. Hey, I did some research. Here it is. And then having a follow-up meeting. And it's in this almost like infinite do loop, what we call the meet, do, review. Right. And so I feel like this deep collaboration concept is how can we start doing work while we're meeting and reviewing in real time? Again, I'm going to keep driving it back to innovation in the world that I live in. The companies want to innovate. Innovation is speed. That's all it is. Everyone has ideas. How do you get that idea to market faster? And it's kind of breaking this do loop and doing work while you're actually meeting and reviewing, because it's a more effective use of time as well, right? Because you talked about a lot of people in that world that you need to bring together. That's a lot of time and resources that if you're not using them effectively, all you're doing is wasting time.
You just made me think of actually an article that I read, and I've read a couple of these, but I'll point out Shopify. So Shopify was a pandemic darling. So Shopify is a company that we work with, partner with, but also in a way compete with, right? They're in the commerce space if you're not familiar with them. And during the pandemic, huge boom, right? Stock price goes crazy. They hire a ton. As we're coming out of the pandemic boom and they're realizing, okay, we have to change some things because our business isn't just selling the the pull of the market isn't just pulling our products through. I read an article that they're encouraging their employees to cancel recurring meetings, and Darren, this concept of people, no leader wants to have meetings. They never want to describe their businesses. We are a business of meetings, and we are so good at scheduling meetings. We are so good at filling a calendar. And, it's like we laugh about that, but I think if we actually were to go and look at the average employee maybe 10, 15 years ago, that is actually how you would measure your worth. You would be able to show your calendar to your manager and say, where's my time? Look at all these meetings I'm in. I'm clearly important. I'm clearly somebody who has to come together. But I think what we're finding is those meetings aren't translating to an impact, right? They're not translating to the outcomes that leaders want. And Darren pulled this up. Darren and I made this slide 6-7 years ago, and this is not a shot at Marissa Mayer by any means, but this was 6-7 years ago when she was saying, Yahoo employees, you have to come back to the office, right? You have to come back. And we were laughing when we were prepping for this, and I said, I saw that Bob Iger, who's now the CEO at Disney, upon his return, he said, Disney employees, you have to come back to the office now. Elon Musk, famously when he took over Twitter, said you have to come back to the office or you have to take a severance package. CEOs are trying to get people to get back together, but I don't think they're getting people back together because they want meetings. They're getting people back together because they want outcomes. They want innovation. And I think this really goes back to what I'm saying is we have a lot of collaboration tools here at Sitecore. We integrate with a lot of collaboration tools because our customers ask about them. But that's all they really are, is a way for us to keep in contact in a way, if we're not together. They're not tools that help us advance the business. And I think that's a fundamental difference that I'm trying to make here.
Yeah, a great point in this quote, and you're right, David. She made this statement in 2013. So you think back then, the hybrid work or remote work or that whole concept, it's been around a lot longer than people realize, and it's powerful, right? Working alone, you're more productive, but they want innovation. When you look at anybody's website, you look at companies, they very rarely tout how productive they are. They taught how innovative they are. So they need to push and they need to drive innovation. And you're exactly right. At the time, there just weren't tools that could help deliver that collective work environment in a remote way. And you and I have been in this space long enough to know, obviously there's Teams, Zoom, a lot of those for the voice and video, but people need more. And you and I firmly believe in this, and I think a lot of people do. You need to collaborate around content. And a lot of people have not been putting an emphasis on that. Now, there's been an upshoot in the last 9 or 10 years of companies that do that. And so now it's a piece of it. So then you have your voice and video, you have your content. But again, kind of thinking of this deep collaboration, how do you bring it all together? Because you need to be able to effectively bring it together because it's still fragmented. And this statement that she's saying still holds true. Can we achieve deep collaboration in a hybrid world? The answer is yes, but it's finding the right tools and technology and the people with the mindset that are willing to kind of adopt these tools. So, I couldn't agree more about that than what you were saying. And another thing I'll kind of pull up here, and David, I'll let you kind of drive this because this is a lot more in your wheelhouse.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll give you my thoughts on this. Back in 2020, Salesforce acquired Slack. Again, and this deep collaboration goes back to the 2020 and before. And that was their thought, is kind of creating this more meaningful way to dialogue and engage with their customers and create these experiences. And it hasn't panned out, I think, exactly how they wanted, because it still isn't revolving around the content and getting everything in a single place. Then you look at what happened recently with Adobe and Figma, again, really right in your wheelhouse. And you look at what they were trying to do, and it really is kind of focused more on this deep collaboration of creating this single place, right, in their minds, because Figma being able to design, and it's more around creating, right? And so, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that and kind of the juxtaposition between the two of those kind of acquisitions and what it means in a deep collaboration world.
Yeah, so I'll talk about the first one. When Salesforce acquired Slack, and so Sitecore, we're a partner to Salesforce. We often represent the content pillar of kind of the Salesforce build out. And when you listen to the marketing that they put out, when I would talk to Salesforce employees, they had this vision of, well, it was a way for us to connect the various functions, right? So a lot of the stuff that I talked about, 5-6 minutes ago about different functions coming together, in their mind, it was, there wasn't a information exchange, which is what I considered Slack to be, right? And again, I read an article in the Wall Street Journal, the last couple of weeks, because, and I take no pleasure in it, but unfortunately, Salesforce had to do those large layoffs, right? So when Darren says it doesn't feel like it's panned out, that's what this article was talking about. Is CIOs were kind of looking at it and saying, it's like, I get it, but there's a lot of ways and a lot of substitutes. And one of the things that I used to talk about when I would talk about collaboration is you have to look for, am I just moving the same task or the same place for somebody to do their job from point A to point B? And is I can make a business case, and most people can figure out like, okay, I can do X and Y, but it's not really changing the way somebody does their work. You're just moving it from one place to the other. And some sales rep at, the company gets a nice commission check on turning the company over, but you haven't introduced a new capability. It's like you haven't learned a new capability. And I think that's what Salesforce, unfortunately, is finding with Slack. There's some cool things there. If you really build into it, of course you can. But from a deep collaboration perspective, humans are we are by nature a very visual company. Darren, you might have the numbers more accurately than I'm about to say, but Darren and I in the past did a study with a large pharmaceutical firm, and it's like you find people remember 5% of a PowerPoint presentation like a week later, but the more you're getting them interacting with content, it's like this exponential growth curve in information recall. And so when I challenge somebody to say like, where do you want your value to be? Do you want people to remember what they talked about? I think that's proof in the pudding, right? So it kind of brings us to Adobe, which I think they're trying to come at this from a little bit of a different perspective as well. So as Darren said, Adobe, this is on the Creative Cloud side. So if you don't know Adobe, they have two kind of sides to their business. Well, you have a couple, but two big ones. You have the Creative Cloud side, and then you have sort of this business application side. And Sitecore is a competitor to Adobe in the business application side, but again, I heard a stat yesterday that about 90% of the world's creatives work with an Adobe product, and as we know, Photoshop is its own verb. And so I think Adobe went after Figma to think about what is a different way for people to interact with content. What is a different way for broader teams to come together and interact with content? Now, I think what Darren and I, wanted to make a point here about this is Adobe is solving for the creative workflow, which is really neat. But how do you connect a creative workflow into a marketing workflow, into a digital experience workflow, into then, that customer loyalty, retention, all of those different pieces? And I think that's where I would suggest kind of the next phase is. Now, Adobe, for example, has a workflow tool. They made an acquisition of a company called Workfront. So they can do task assignment, right? And you can kind of track the work there. But, I come from the project management space as well. That's always just a shell for it. And it's kind of like the peak of an iceberg, right? What happens underneath that task? So if you have a task that says team come together, okay, actually what you're really doing is you're getting 10 people together. That's a very expensive meeting, and what's actually happening there. And I think that's bringing this back to deep collaboration. That's kind of the next phase, right? So when you see things like, we're connecting the creative workflow, great. how does the creative workflow connect into anything else? And what is your hub for bringing the workflows together? And I'll go back to, again, the core thesis we have here. Leaders don't want meetings. They don't want to say we're a highly meeting focused company. They want to say we're an innovative company. So, this is what Darren's got on here is, how do you get from an idea to a high value outcome? And Darren and I used to run workshops about this. Like, how do you get from idea to impact? How do you get from idea to outcome? So Darren, maybe you can talk a little bit about what you put up here.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, and I want to go back to what you were talking about with the pharmaceutical company, and you're spot on. And basically what they were telling us is, if you read or hear something, right, you're using 2 of your 5 senses, and so you're only at 40% of kind of your capacity. When you include touch and interaction, now you bump that up to 3 of 5, and that's 60%. And so that in and of itself is kind of the underlying thought of, all right, now how do we interact? And really what I'm dovetailing into is engagement. And deep collaboration is rooted in engagement, and kind of this whole idea to outcome that we've got up here. And the way that we look at it, I look at it, and David and I used to talk about it all the time, is it starts with an idea, right? How do you capture that idea, and what fuels that idea? And it's information and inspiration. So how do you assemble that? David talks about the pharmaceutical company. We were talking to some researchers, and it's like, how do you capture ideas? And it's like, you don't know, right? You could be out and you could scribble it on a notepad. It could be a digital kind of word application. A lot of different ways, but it's in a different area. Then you kind of tuck it away in a repository. So it's like, how can you gather that in a common area and continue to take information and inspiration and grow that? But then the next phase of that is, how do you socialize it? And that's a really critical part of this, because ideas can't live in a vacuum. And so how can you create, again, as this deep collaboration, I'll keep tying it back to, it's a single place that I've got my idea and the information that supports it here, but now I need to socialize it. And there may be some collaborating around it to gain perspective. That's important. So other people are going to help me gain perspective around these thoughts and ideas. And now we need to organize those thoughts and get aligned. You'll hear a lot about this, and we talk about Kevin Plank from Under Armour, the CEO, and he said the number one most important thing in our company is being aligned. And you think about this, and David, you and I always use this cheesy analogy of rowing, right? If you put one person in a rowboat, and he or she's rowing versus 6 people in a canoe, who's going to get there faster? Well, you think the 6 people, but if they're not aligned and they're not rowing at the same time, they're going in a circle. So getting those people aligned. And so this second leg of that stool, that collaborative piece of bringing people together and socializing that. And again, getting these insights and perspective. And the last piece of it, now that we're aligned and we feel this is a great idea, is giving an effective presentation. There's so many great ideas that end up on the cutting room floor because they were not presented properly. They did not engage their audience. Whatever the case may be, it just didn't happen. It didn't resonate. Maybe they weren't able to show their work. David can probably attest to this. Working in Fortune 100s, a lot of companies are going to say, your presentation has to be no more than 5 slides, no more than 3 to 5 bullets. You may have spent a year of your life doing research and gathering information, doing all of this stuff, but you have to condense it down into 5 slides, 3 to 5 bullets per slide. So there's nuance. If you don't present it the right way, you're in a difficult situation. And so tying this back to the deep collaboration, is there a way to use a tool or a technology that brings you all of this, all 3 legs of this, that everyone's able to access it continually? And I think the answer is yes. And this is what is going to be the emerging factor that drives deep collaboration, where 2-3 years ago, it wasn't resonating because they wanted this single place and they didn't have it. They had a place that you could bring a few things, but it kept falling down a little bit. So that, to me, and this slide kind of really drives that home, is being able to ideate, collaborate, and present all kind of in this same world, because it's all right there. And I used to talk about this all the time. Imagine being able to present and somebody says, all right, and we can go back to grade school math. Hey, show your work, right? And being able to easily show, here's all of where we did our research. Here's some whiteboard sessions, all of this that then helps people. Okay, now I see why you did this. So that to me is really what embodies this whole kind of concept of deep collaboration.
And if I can add one thing too, I mean, you might have spent a year getting ready for that meeting. It might have taken you also 3 months of waiting to get to that moment. And wouldn't you like to avoid that moment where somebody asks you a question and you think to yourself, I had it at my fingertips, but I don't have it in this presentation. And we've all been in those meetings, whether you're selling to somebody or you're trying to convince somebody, and you realize at that moment you've lost it. You've lost the ability to drive the next step that you wanted. And so one of the things that I appreciate about Aleo, right, is I can have, for example, my core content here, my presentation that I'm doing, but I can easily pull up, oh, here's clearly the divergence of why we went with path A instead of path B. And then if somebody were to say to me, okay, talk to me about a what if scenario, I can pull that content up without losing the initiative, without losing that ability to say, yes, this is still aligned with the proposal that I have in front of you. So that presentation part, don't overlook that. But that's where, again, we haven't talked a ton about this, but I think a core component. So in the world of like the Gartners and Forresters, they often try to define, okay, how do you know if you're doing deep collaboration? And one of the core pillars that I think of deep collaboration is multi-content, right? So if you're exchanging PowerPoints, you're not doing deep collaboration, right? If you have multiple content types, if you have interactive content and it's all kind of there together, to me, that's a sign of deep collaboration, right? That's what you're kind of looking for. If you're bringing in people in the room and external to the room, like that's deep collaboration, right? Because you're fundamentally giving yourself a different way to think. That ability for persistence, right? That to me is deep collaboration because it matters what you talked about, right? Like if you think about it, Darren, like if that's the thing about Teams or Slack meeting or Zoom meeting. If you don't record it and it goes away, it's like, was it really worth that 30 minutes? Like if there's nothing worth recording, was it really worth it? And so there are some of these factors that I think make up deep collaboration, and it's not like a checklist that you have to go through, but if you're asking yourself what makes this different than a Teams meeting, or what makes this different than just meeting over Zoom, those are three things that come top of mind to me.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree. And a couple quick things, and I think we're going to wrap it up here in a minute. That when you were talking about the ability to dynamically bring in content, again, we were talking about speed, doing work while you're meeting, and your scenario. The typical way is, hey, I don't have that. I'll email it to you. Well, after the call, you probably have another meeting. So you're not going to email that document or information out, at least for a couple hours, maybe a day. Then I'm busy. I don't see it. I may not see it for a full 1 or 2 working days. Now I've lost all context of why we were talking about it and why it's important. So that dynamic capability of bringing in content. I have a couple of images here, and you were talking about kind of those high-end presentations, working with some of these larger professional service firms in the world, seeing how they run their experience centers. And it's very much deep collaboration because they bring them in, and it's not just a prescribed presentation where it's, I know your problem, here's the solution. I want to hear from you. It's very much empathy based. So let's do these activities that we're going to be able to gather information. And based on what you tell me, then we're going to co-author a solution. And so it goes through this whole journey that they're taking these people on. Again, the professional services and larger companies trying to sell into organizations. They don't want it just to be that prescribed presentation. It's let's work together collectively, and being able to do this not only in a room, but also remotely, because that's that collaborative equity. We need everybody to be part of this. If you couldn't be here on site, it's still going to be a very meaningful engagement for you, because we want you to participate, not just sit and be a bystander.
And I think that's a fourth one, right? Active participation. That's how you know you're doing deep collaboration too.
Yeah, that and a very, very critical one. And I'll end it with this: is talking to the pharmaceutical company, they used to use that analogy of moving rocks. And if you're in a meeting or you're a part of a team, and only 2 of 5 of you are pushing that rock, it's either going to move real slow or it's not going to move. So you need that active participation from all 5 of those team members. You're going to move that rock. So. Well, we're up at the top of the hour, so thank you everyone for joining us. If you have any questions or follow up information, both Dave and my contact information is there, or you feel free to reach out to Aleo, and we'll be happy to kind of pick up the conversation.